You're listening to Don't Waste Water.
We tap into ESG statements of Fortune 100 companies, people like Microsoft and all of their friends, that had set net zero water goals, water stewardship goals. But they were struggling in some of their sites to achieve net zero because their data centers, for example, were in drought-stricken areas. So no matter how many wells you dig and how many trees you plant, if it doesn't rain, it's not going to create a net zero. So we found a new source of water.
Hello, bonjour, and welcome to the Don't Waste Water podcast.
We are distributing 60 million litres that Microsoft happily, as our impact sponsor, are paying for this local community. But that one sugar mill can produce around 300 million litres.
I'm your host, Antoine Walter, and in today's episode, I'm delighted to welcome Terry Paul as my guest.
We can literally have commercial contracts on all of the other components, process engineering and servicing, the logistics of getting water to the communities, working with the local NGO partner. All of these can be essentially contracted out via the platform. The platform itself is the source of all truth.
Terry is the CEO and founder of Botanical Water Technologies.
So the source of truth has to be absolutely ironclad, and blockchain gives that. It's not about being fancy. If we call it something else, it doesn't really matter. But I love the underlying tech that really means that when a Microsoft of the world pays millions of dollars to generate millions of litres of water for thousands of people, that they have to have guarantee that the money that they have spent has gone to exactly it's meant to go.
Botanical Water Technologies harvests water by filtering and purifying fruit and vegetable processing evaporative condensate to create the world's first plant source pure water. The AI revolution has an unexpected weak point, or not so unexpected if you recall that you're on a water podcast. It's water. It's always water. But actually, the numbers are telling. If you recall our discussion with Alice Schmidt and Claudia Winkler on their Fast Forward book, when you ask ChatGPT a question, you're using about a liter of water for every 40 to 100 queries. Training GPT-3 alone, which remember is a smaller LLM than the ones we're using today, consumed over 4 million liters of water. And this is just the beginning. With AI computing needs projected to double every 3 to 4 months, we're looking at water consumption reaching between 4.2 and 6.6 billion cubic meters by 2027. That's nearly half of the UK's annual water consumption. Just a few weeks ago, I had a conversation with Andrew Collier from Veolia on this microphone, and we discussed, amongst others, how data centers are struggling with this challenge. Andrew wrote a great blog entry on Veolia's website, which I'm linking you in the show notes, where he does the maths, and honestly, it's brutal. Microsoft's water consumption jumped 34% in a single year, reaching 1.7 billion gallons. Andrew is from the US, I'll stick with his gallons, but with a heavy heart. Google's went up 22% to hit 5.56 billion gallons. That's about 800 times the volume of the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool, to stick with US references. But this isn't just a tech sector problem. Gartner predicts 90% of companies will have adopted AI by next year. But if you recall that by 2015, McKinsey and the World Bank predicted that the world will miss 40% of the water to make the balance by 2030, and this was before data centers and AI's boom, you start to get an idea of how water scarcity is pushing corporations into uncharted territory. Now they have not been sitting on their hands either. We're seeing tech giants pledging to become water positive by 2030, for instance, implementing innovative solutions like Veolia's Upgrade Water Footprint platform we discussed with Andrew some weeks ago, and even funding municipal infrastructure projects. Meta is financing fire protection water systems in Oregon, while Microsoft is partnering with Phytotech to hunt down leak across 350 kilometers of Thames Water's network. I might have discussed that with Victoria Edwards. I might have put you the link in the comments. If you don't check, you won't know. But what's maybe the most interesting is how this corporate water crisis is reshaping the traditional links between the public and private sectors. When a tech company starts funding watershed restoration, or a data center operator becomes the primary investor in municipal water infrastructure, you can't ignore that there's a fundamental shift in how we manage our arguably most precious resource. That's innovative for sure. And speaking of innovation, today's conversation perfectly exemplifies this evolving landscape. I'm sitting down with Terry Paul, who's pioneered a fascinating approach with Botanical Water Technologies, quite literally growing water. His company just announced a partnership with Microsoft to provide 60 million liters of clean drinking water annually to water-stressed villages in India. But here's the twist. This water is not pumped from the ground or treated from a river. It's harvested from sugarcane processing, tapping into what could be 3 trillion liters of water globally that would otherwise go to waste. As AI's thirst for water grows, this is exactly the kind of breakthrough solutions we need to explore, which we will today by checking how the process of extracting water from fruits and vegetables actually works and what makes this water different from regular filtered water, but also how corporations can turn their water impact into community support and how scalable this solution is. We'll also discuss platforms, watersheds, way forward, vision, and even blockchain, all right after I remind you that if you like what you hear, you can help me out tremendously in getting the word out by sharing this episode with a colleague, a friend, your boss, or your team. Think of it as your perfect water dispenser story. By the way, thank you all again for the super kind messages you keep sending me on LinkedIn. That means the word to me, and it gets me going on that content journey week after week for 229 weeks in a row, even in this kind of temporary studio setup where it's running in the back, on the go like today. So from the bottom of my heart, thanks for the support, and I'll meet you on the other side. Hi Terry, welcome to the show.
Hi Antoine, thanks for inviting me.
We have a lot on our plate for today, and I'm not even sure with what we should start, because it could be a story of access to water. It could be a story of food waste. It could be a story of water trading. It could be a story of corporate water responsibility. And I'm wondering, if you have to pick just one, what is it as a story?
Well, it's a more holistic approach. I think it's a story about taking a clean sheet of paper and then building something from scratch. And regardless of whether it's in financial services, in food, in water, the fundamentals are the same. But I am in love with our water business. It is a passion project, and that's very dangerous. Anyone that's been investing as long as I have, it's normally a bad sign when you fall in love with the project. But this is too good to believe.
If someone was to bump into you, which was supposed to be our encounter in New York, like you go out of the elevator, you come at my podcast microphone, and then you get to just give me a two-liner about Botanical Water Technologies, what would that two-liner be?
Well, we actually make it into 3 words. We grow water. When people ask me in the lift, what do? I say we grow water. Now, they either run away in the other direction, thinking this guy's a bit crazy, or they ask the next question, well, how does that work? And then obviously it develops from there.
So we grow water, that's your tagline. Mm-hmm. But if we try to deconstruct that one, because I didn't run away, so I'm still here, you're not really the one growing the water. You're ensuring that the water which was grown doesn't get wasted.
It's a recovery and reuse of what was previously an invisible new source of water, a sustainable water source. So essentially fruit and vegetables, plants, sugarcane are often 95% water. So if we could work a way to harvest the water that naturally occurs in plants and then treat it for drinking purposes, highest purpose use, human consumption, then we would have discovered a new source of water known as botanical water.
So that's where I would like to start the story for today, which is, if I look up your path, you're a repeat entrepreneur. You've been in a variety of fields. I say variety, but still there's a consistency between food and bev, between the water word and between the financial word, with the exception of your media company, which I wasn't able to fit within that box. But what I'm interested in getting to understand is what happens in 2017 when you get involved with aqua botanical beverages. It sounds to me like the beginning of the water story. So what triggers that?
Yeah, look, it was a chance meeting with a friend of mine, an accountant, funnily enough, I hadn't seen for some years. We had a business in Indonesia, and I was sitting in an airport, and this guy came and literally sat as you are, directly opposite me. And I thought, wow, I haven't seen you for ages. So we caught up back in Melbourne. We got talking about what it is that we do and the fact that we predominantly look to sort of innovative inventions or inventors to partner with them and then help them go through a process. And you mentioned a chemical engineer in a place called Mildura here in Victoria who was making water from carrots, which was quite intriguing. So being a little bit crazy, I did a little bit of desktop investigation and it looked very interesting. So I caught a Rex flight, a little internal, one of those little pair of planes, which I hate flying on, and visited him and looked at the invention itself. The process was attaching as a pilot plant to a carrot factory. He was making potable water. It actually tasted quite good and was bottling it and selling it to sort of high-end restaurants, I guess. So then we chatted for probably nearly close to 2 years before our family decided to invest in this business and help go through a process of what we call commercialization and then corporatization. And here we are today.
You say interesting, and interesting can have so many meanings. What makes that water extraction from carrots interesting? Is it a business story? Is it a money story? Is it an impact story? Is it like a geek technical story? What makes it interesting?
Yeah, look, initially it was the novelty. The idea of harvesting water from plants was novel for me because probably a decade earlier, I started to gain interest. I could see the world was greening. The term sustainability really wasn't mainstream, but this is now sort of 2008, 2009. I was actually in the dairy industry, another business. I built a dairy business over a 13-year period and then sold that to a multinational. And I was looking for where the world was heading, and you could see this term sustainability coming time and time again. I was looking in the corporate world and seeing companies like Danone buying soya milk businesses, which was intriguing. And then this really intrigued me because I'd not read or seen anything like it. And it was so fundamental that this water really sat invisibly in thousands of factories around the world. And water scarcity and contamination was becoming the next oil, the next big thing. You could read about it. It was being quoted far back as 2012, I think, was the original oil is the next water. You're seeing it in the movies and everywhere else. So I think I was just intrigued initially. I'm that sort of person. I like to investigate, I'll ask those sorts of questions. So it was patented, and I didn't know a lot about patents in this particular area, but essentially they were quite detailed, and it was talking about recovery and reuse of water, which was the fundamental patent, and even things like isotopic composition, that this water actually had a different composition to traditional water because the isotopes had been fractionated. So I'm not a technical guy, right? I'm an investor guy. I'm a money guy, for want of a better way. So I know a little bit about process engineering and patents, and I like to use that, Antoine, predominantly to create a moat around our investments, first mover, patents, technology, all of those things. So it was really more around it being a novel idea was where the intrigue came.
I get that you're not an engineer, but I am. So I'm a geek, and I need to understand that one. You say there's IP and it's a novel technology. What is it exactly?
Well, essentially, when we make everyday products around the world, there are thousands of factories that have been making products like sugar or tomato ketchup or tomato sauce, as we would call in Australia or the UK, or fruit and vegetable concentrates, distilleries, people making alcohol. What all of these industries have in common is they use a large evaporative process to concentrate the source fruit or vegetable. And the byproduct is an evaporative condensate, essentially in simple terms, the steam. So we catch that condensate, which is the shadow of the fruit, as I like to talk. We cool it, and then we run it through our water harvest unit. Now, water harvest unit is really made up of traditional filtration or purification stuff that you would see in many factories. There's nothing unique. But the way we've put it together and we've installed it in a 40-foot shipping container, it's actually mobile. We can move the machine around, creates a high quality, in fact, an award-winning potable water, a fabulous drinking water, which is very silky. I'm going to do an ad here for you. There it is in Australia. We've been drinking this for a decade, called Botanical Water. This was sitting in a carrot, in a tomato, in some source fruit and or vegetable. And that was the beginning of the idea.
I get the elegance of the idea. What I'd like to understand is, as a muggle, this sounds like super niche. I saw the videos. It sounds incredible. I mean, ketchup is the perfect example. You have tomato concentrate, you have a tomato, you squeeze it to make concentrate. Of course, the byproduct is water. If you can get a way to catch that water, it's super elegant. But wouldn't the same technology be able to do whether atmospheric water generation, or you catch whatever's flowing through an industrial plant, which doesn't come from a fruit, and the same technology could grab it. So what is it so specific with the fruit and vegetables which makes it appealing beyond the story?
Yeah, remember, it's actually the steam. It's not the water when you're cooking. The condensate is actually the steam that's coming up. So it's actually a good waste or byproduct source to filter and purify to a potable standard. We don't have to make it complicated. It's unique and novel, and the simplicity is its charm. Sometimes less is more. We don't have to make something complicated to sound smart. I like the simplicity. The smarts come with when you find, we believe 3 trillion litres of this evaporative condensate is thrown away from these factories, often to environmental detriment. Literally many factories, they pump it out the back, piping hot into a river. No treatment, zero treatment. And, it has ODs and CODs, all sorts of things in there. Nothing too nasty. We're not talking about a chemical factory, but essentially it can upset that waterway itself. So to be able to tap into that, to redirect that waste stream and put it through a purification process and create a really high potable water, in a world where water scarcity and contamination is a problem, is the complex part. The invention actually becomes the simple part in a funny way. I mean, it's, one obviously feeds off the other, and I'm sure we'll get to it, but we've added many components over the last 4 years.
We'll get to it. Just because you mentioned the 3 trillion liters, I made some quick maths, and you mentioned how you package everything in a 40-foot container. I'm going to assume that you don't do that by accident. You do that because the 40-foot container makes about sense for an industrial site. The throughput of one of these containers is 100 to 130 million liters. So 3 trillion liters divided by 100 to 130 million liters makes about 25,000 units if you were to catch the entire 3 trillion liters which are available. So I did the maths not for the big number of the 25,000 units, but to get a sense of how distributed, scattered, and decentralized it is, what we're discussing here. What is your vision when you say 3 trillion? Is it to really get those 25,000 units out there in the field and catch everything?
It's a little bit different. You're on the, it's a mud map. We're in startup land, moving to scale up land. So, the 100-page business plan is probably not appropriate in my experience. It's a little bit of science mixed with a little bit of poetry, a little bit of, innovation. But your math is correct. But these sites, these sugar mills and tomato processors can actually produce a hell of a lot more. This project, for example, in India that we've just announced with Microsoft, and I'm sure we'll get to that as well, we are distributing 60 million litres that Microsoft happily, as our impact sponsor, are paying for this local community. But that one sugar mill can produce around 300 million litres. So we would need multiple water harvest units, or we would need to scale those units. And we're actually working with our process engineers at the moment. Do we run it like a manifold, stack them, and you can run one or you can run all? Or do we create a train where we break the process into maybe 3 shipping containers, a beginning, a middle, and an end? And then the reason we have a limit, Antoine, is just size, fitting equipment, pumps. If we want to go to a bigger pump eventually. And you're right, the 40-foot shipping container was just convenience. It means we can move these around comfortably because the world is built around 40-foot shipping containers.
So I'd like to take the Microsoft example as a good case study to go through the various steps. Right before that, I have a last stop, which is to understand the difference between Aqua Botanical Beverages, which is your endeavor of 2017, and Botanical Water Technologies, which is, there's the foundation as well, but I get what the foundation does. What's the difference between Botanical Water Technologies and Aqua Botanical Beverages?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I guess the difference is 4 years of work, if I can sort of jokingly answer it that way. So the story continues. You find a novel invention, you invest in that, which is essentially a bottled water business. And it can be a fabulous business in its own right. Imagine now selling that in Starbucks, sustainable water, etc. The millennials will go nuts over it. But I felt that what kept me up at night was, this is a bigger invention. This deserves more. So I started to think, if you found a new source of potable water, 3 trillion litres, how do we manage it? How do we own it? How do we distribute it? How do we count it or account for it? And I guess what I worked out was that what's disrupted the world over the last decade or so are platforms. If you think about it, Amazon, as I jokingly say, a guy called Jeff started selling books online and built a business called Amazon, Uber, Airbnb, even social media, Meta. These are all connecting people in one way, either through a commercial transaction or social interaction or whatever. And that was really the next step of the business, finding a novel invention, perfecting the process engineering so that we could fit it into a 40-foot shipping container to give it portability and certainty. And then starting to build, and now having built, the Botanical Water Exchange, which is a blockchain platform. Now, I say blockchain with some hesitancy, Antoine, because everyone thinks I'm selling Bitcoin or something crazy. But essentially, we partnered up with Fujitsu through their Belgium office. They've got a blockchain specialist unit there. And really, it became the source of truth. We needed to be able to account for all of the stakeholders, as we call them. There are 4 stakeholders, and we can go into that a little bit later. So we built that in order to bring all the parties into an ecosystem. And then the final piece was, I love demand-driven businesses. Rather than making a widget and me coming to convince you that you need to have one of these because you're an early adopter of widgets, I felt that we needed to go and find a world problem and solve it. And water scarcity and contamination was and is that problem. So we tapped into ESG statements of Fortune 100 companies, people like Microsoft and all of their friends, that had set net zero water goals, water stewardship goals. But they were struggling in some of their sites to achieve net zero because their data centers, for example, were in drought-stricken areas. So no matter how many wells you dig and how many trees you plant, if it doesn't rain, it's not going to create a net zero. So we found a new source of water, a sugar mill in the same basin that was creating sugar for the last 100 years that can now become a new water fountain. So the platform, the exchange, connects the impact sponsor, Microsoft, to a processor, a sugar mill, to an NGO, as you had Gary White, the water.orgs of the world, to a community. And that's the business now. That business model, the 4 stakeholders, has created from a bottled water business to now an ESG demand-driven water stewardship business.
To take Microsoft as our example here, they enter a step 1 into the Botanical Water Exchange. They buy your credits, blockchain warranted credits, which trade within a same sub-basin. And in the same sub-basin where Microsoft happens to have an operation, there is that sugarcane plant, which they acquired 60 million liters of their water and give it back to the community. And hence, Microsoft has this pledge of 2030 net positive water. And so that goes towards that goal.
Correct.
Let's go step by step. Step 1, you're building this platform. I had on that microphone a conversation with Katrina Donaghy from Water Ledger a while ago. Instead of going for your fellow Australian who's rolling out in the northern part of Australia where there's this established water rights, you team up with Fujitsu. What's the backstory of that one?
Well, really, in the essence, Antoine, we are a technology business. I mean, eventually, and I've done this with other businesses, we can literally have commercial contracts on all of the other components, process engineering and the servicing, the logistics of getting water to the communities, working with the local NGO partner. All of these can be essentially contracted out via the platform. The platform itself is the source of all truth. This is where the real value is. It has a higher commercial value, but its real value is that it's able to bring all the parties together. I don't think we could possibly have done that at the time in a third-party platform. That could change. We could onboard or collaborate with these platforms. I mean, these Australian platforms are really dealing with river water or, different mentality. Imagine me now 4 years later, even with a background of what I do, trying to convince somebody else that we're not crazy, So we had to build it ourselves. So we created a detailed RFP document, an 80-page doc. We went to market. We got 20 formal responses. We distilled that down to 2. One was a small had built trading, oil and gas trading out of Dubai, a small business. They were pretty good. They were actually the front runner. I shouldn't say this too much. I hope I've got too many people listening. And then there was Fujitsu, and I was quite negative on Fujitsu. But in my first meeting with Fujitsu, the guy I met is a guy by the name of Frederick de Broek, and he's a little bit out of the box. He came to that meeting as a 40-year-old guy with a mohawk, which was interesting in its own right. But there was a meeting of the minds, and he got it. And then Fujitsu, as I dug a bit deeper, Japanese companies are often quite sustainably driven. They have sustainability at their core culturally, even the country itself. So it worked really well. So that platform has now been built and we are just onboarding our first stakeholders. And one final piece We also have built another piece of software through another one of our portfolio companies called Actuary, which allows us to data scrape and build layers of modeling. So someone like a Microsoft or one of their consultant firms can go on to the platform, can be onboarded, and then they can go to a jurisdiction, let's call it India, and they can layer. The first layer may be all of the sub-basins. The second layer may be drought. The third layer may be where are all the sugar mills located? Where are all the distilleries located? The fourth could be where are all the data centers located? And then they'll be able to look at a basin, look at a sugar mill, look at a data center and match. And that's the perfect match. It's almost like a dating game, I guess. And that's why the platform is so powerful, that it's about creating an ecosystem.
The vision is incredible. Like really incredible. Again, that is a topic we've scratched several times on the microphone, and every single time we scratch it, we're like, it would be cool to have it. Sounds totally unrealistic because that's a hell of work. And I still believe it's a hell of work, but it's incredible because you're on that path to do it. What you're referring to, if I get it right, is the sustainable impact maps. That in itself, I mean, I've been trained in hydrogeology. Half of my degree in engineering is hydrogeology. And when you start mapping hydrogeological basin, that's the right thing to do, but it's a hell of a work. Why did you take on to make that? I mean, you take the word and you go, oh, we're going to slice it in every single piece. It has to be sliced to map all the sub-basins.
Yeah, it's actually easier than you think. As I mentioned, I invested in another company called Actuary here in Australia, a couple of space aeronautical engineers, a couple of young guys, and sat on their board for a while and am an advisor to the company now. And I literally sat with the guys and went through the vision as I've just described it. And they did all the heavy lifting. They went away and essentially data scraped wherever they could and created this mapping software, which we call SWIM. I wish I could do a demonstration for you. Funnily enough, it was probably in the scale of the platform that we built, the easiest part, not the hardest part, because it's just being able to access third-party data, weather data, drought data, geological basins and all the rest.
But that's very country specific. I mean, you might have access to some data in some shape or form in a certain country, and in a different country, it's going to be incredibly different. So how do you scrape all of that?
Yeah, well, that's what these guys do. They've been doing it for their own business. So we've been lucky that they've done a fair bit of that. We are targeting India and the US initially. Now, we've had inquiry out of Mexico, we've had inquiry out of Africa, South America, Colombia, et cetera, but we're being disciplined because I don't want to make this mistake. When I mentor startups, I tell them to stay as focused as possible, particularly in the early years, because you can just become distracted and you become vanilla everything and achieve nothing. And why we've picked those two jurisdictions, which allows us to build the mapping in a lot of detail, heavy detail in this mapping software. We picked the developed world, the US, and we all know the US has got lots of problems with their water anyway, but essentially we knew if we could build this in the US, then we could replicate it in Europe and other jurisdictions. And then we went to India because India has 18% of the world's population and 4% of the world's water. 1.5 million people a year die in India from water and sanitation related diseases, predominantly children. They drink bad water, they get diarrhea, get sick, and they die. So it was a country that also has 800 sugar mills and distilleries from the north to the south. And each one of these mills can produce at least 2 million litres a day of our water. That's around 1.6 billion litres a day of potable water, distributed nicely from north to south and often associated with heavy drought regions. So it was just irresistible to do that. And this first project will have a lot of follow-on projects.
But for me to get that one right, because you say rightfully that in a startup, you have to be focused, but still you do blockchain, you do sub-layering of hydrogeology basins, you do grow water with your containers. It's still a lot of moving parts. I'm coming back to my red thread of the Microsoft project. Microsoft has several projects ongoing. They have been working with Fido in the past, for instance, to do some leak reduction. And I was just thinking of that because what they're doing with Fido could be absolutely located on your BWX platform and on your SWIM map, because they would have a consistent way to track the water which is returned through leak reduction and stuff like that, because now they would have the blockchain element to it and they could map it in a very elegant way, which would showcase where they're bringing the water back. That's, to my knowledge, not part of what Fido ambitions to be offering anytime in the future. So it sounds like a nice synergy, but granted that you see the other pieces of your ecosystem as not fully closed ecosystem and funnel, but as something where you might be open to plug in other services. So what's your vision there?
And you're spot on. I mean, this does develop as time goes on. If you think 4 years ago, bottled water, where are we sitting today? The Microsoft relationship started in March 23 at UN Water. We met Eliza there then, and it's now been announced at Climate Week a couple of weeks ago when we were meant to meet there. That due diligence and that development happened over 18 months, which is great. It's a great testimonial for us because commercial, legal, all of that DD's been done. So that's always the most difficult one. The platform's been built in such a way, and there's no new ideas. If I go back, I've been in business for 40 years. I know it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous amount of time, Antoine. I look in the mirror and I think, who's that old bloke looking back? And then I realize it's me. But I can remember in the 80s and 90s in the financial services world, when the first platforms were being built, or which are now developed into what they call wrap funds, and where you could invest $1, it would then get diversified into multiple categories, shares, property, cash, bonds, international, local. It would all get invested at a wholesale rate. Then all the reporting would come back to a centralized point, and one statement would be given to the customer or to the advisor, the account. That was like amazing in its day. Essentially, that's what we're doing. We've taken an idea that was 20, 30 years ago now. This is really early days. I was still using a DOS. I had DOS, green screen DOS. I've always been an early adopter of technology. In fact, my first computer cost me more than my first car. But that's where the inspiration came from. Once you create this ecosystem, what we can then do is onboard other collaborative relationships, people that may not want to go to the trouble of building a platform. We're happy to house them if they have something that's complementary. It also creates an ecosystem. We can add education to that too. Maybe somewhere that's people want to come and learn, not necessarily transact commercially, or they want to come and see something. So we're not closed off to the idea of it has to just be a trading, buy and sell. We really want to create a place, an ecosystem that really discusses water and water scarcity and contamination, the problem of.
You're an early adopter, which has good and bad sides. I mean, I'm going to be the devil's advocate here. Why do you need blockchain? I mean, it could be just trading without that additional decentralized layer. So why do you go into that aside from because it's cool?
Well, exactly. And you probably noted I did say that often these days I never mention it's blockchain because blockchain is a connotation word. There are denotation words, and connotation of Bitcoin or some even nefarious activity. Who knows? Blockchain is a bit of cowboy type stuff. So the main reason of blockchain, as it was explained to me, it's a distributed ledger, right? It's really the source of truth. Unlike institutions that want to control information, you go to them, you ask them, how much money do I have in your bank? They say $1,000, and you say, thank you very much. Here we distribute that to a whole bunch of different people. And the way we validate or verify that it's $1,000 is I come to you and you don't know the next guy, and I say, how much does Terry have in the account? It's 1,000, it's 1,000, it's 1,000, it's 1,000. Therefore, it must be 1,000. So it is hard under that basis to tamper with that. So the source of truth has to be absolutely ironclad, and blockchain gives that. It's not about being fancy. If we call it something else, it doesn't really matter. But I love the underlying tech that really means that when a Microsoft of the world pays millions of dollars to generate millions of liters of water for thousands of people, that they have to have guarantee that the money that they have spent has gone to exactly where it's meant to go. And we data scrape all the way through, Anton. We actually data scrape. Our water harvest unit has 170 touch points inside in real time. One day we'll have a Tesla wall. We'll actually have a wall of all the units in real time. We can turn the units on. We can turn them off remotely. Like your car, like your Tesla, it will tell you when it needs a service and so on. We then data scrape to the NGO. Our deal with the NGO is we say to them, look, we're going to give you X million liters of water paid for by a Fortune 10 company, but we need you firstly to help us with the impact assessment. So we do an assessment on the community of education, health, how many doctors visits, et cetera, before. And then obviously we're going to follow that through over the coming years to see what the impact, this is what we're driven. It's not volumetric replenishment. WASH programs are measured by impact, not volume. Volume's the easy bit. That's why most of these companies go to replenishment, because you can get high volumes out into the biodiversity out into the environment. Wash is much, much harder to achieve, a lot slower, and obviously a lot more expensive. But we've tried to take that friction out. We've tried to make it frictionless, and blockchain gives us the source of truth.
Is it what you call a water impact credit, what you're just describing now here? How did you define the water impact credits? And is it your own definition, or is it something which is like shared horizontally?
Yeah, in the early days, we defined it because there wasn't any. 4 years ago, the industry was still catching up. You're seeing a lot of the standards, which are still developing. You would have seen in recent times, Limnotech and others are developing all of the legislation, all of the definitions around this. We sort of coined the phrase as an impact credit because that's what it is. WASH programs are really about impact. They're not about volume. It works well. I think we call it a WIC. The fact is that it can be volumetrically measured because unlike nature-based solutions where we're planting trees and digging wells and trying to deliver that way, we've got a technology-based solution. We have a machine which is volumetrically linked to the platform like a car meter. Every time it ticks a litre over, we measure turbidity, we measure pH, we measure volume, we measure temperature before it leaves the machine. This is it all done in real time. It means that when you do spend $1, you know exactly what you're getting. You're not waiting for trees to grow and then be burned down next year or flooded the following year, or the management team, all the carbon stuff that you're reading about in the papers, all the scandalous stuff that's going on there. You know, these projects often don't last, don't have a long lifespan. We're creating water immediately in that moment. You can stand at one end of the machine and watch it go in, and you can stand at the other end of the machine and drink what's coming out.
That's also where I did a bit of stupid maths just to get my head around that one. I still get my red thread of these 60 million liters, which Microsoft committed in India to the sugarcane factory through you. If you take those 60 million liters and you say, I want to cover the drinking needs of humans, then that's 80,000 population equivalent because roughly 2 liters a day. And then you do the maths. If you go the municipal water approach way instead and say, I want to take the international engineering approved definition of an equivalent habitant, which in this case is not 2 liters per day, but 150 liters per day because you have to cover for people washing their clothes and whatever, then that's 1,100 population equivalent. So on one end, if I'm now Elisa Roberts from Microsoft and I need to put up a PowerPoint where I'm showcasing all the great stuff I'm doing thanks to Botanical Water, I'd probably rather say I'm bringing drinking water to 80,000 people. But that means they still need to find the other 148 liters, which they need in their day to cook. And even if you say that's a Western standard, and if you go for the World Health Organization standard, which is 50 liters a day, they still need to find 48 additional liters of water. Whereas if you say, I want to have this pure absolute impact where I'm creating a decentralized water utility, which is now providing a community with all the water they need by a Western standard, advanced, whatever you want to call it, those 1,100 people have their life changed through the 60 million. So, but 1,100 is less spectacular than 80,000. So how do you set the bar? What's your definition of the water impact?
I think we have chosen, and that sounds too serious in a way, like it's me changing the world. But I think logic says that this water, because of its pure high quality, as I said, it's one beverage of the year here in Australia in 2019. First time a water's ever done that. That's all beverages, alcoholic and the whole lot. I mean, fancy water, because water's water, right? But it's not. We think...
I can tell because I'm not a bottled water guy. I did videos to say how I'm not into bottled water. Nevertheless, that's one I drank, which is not just water. It's something else. So I give you that, silly.
Oh, and you would have tried it. You would have tried it in New York. Yeah. You would have tried it at Rethink.
I tried it 2 years ago. I tried it last year, and this year I was even looking forward because I know that at the conference is a place where I can get it, whereas in my local supermarket I don't.
Well,
so, sorry, I didn't want to cut you out.
Yeah, so we've really stuck to the discipline of drinking and cooking, essentially. Why? Because that's where the impact is happening. It's comfortable to have a shower and wash your clothes. But often that can be done, in some of these countries are done at the local river or whatever their daily routine is. But where the impact comes, predominantly drinking and consuming unclean water, is where people get sick and die. So that's where we're going to have our most impact. And that's where the focus should be. In Bella, or the Nagpur region where the Microsoft project is, and we'll be running in December. We go live. We're very close. We're doing trials in November. finalise permits, drinking water permits. And what we've done there, just to add a level of complexity, which was a crazy thing that came up in a meeting, is we're piping the water. You mentioned FIDO. They've hit our radar where it became obvious because of the narrow streets. We were creating tanker water back and forth to put 6 ATMs in the village. So there's 25,000 litre ATMs. Each person will have an RFID card and they will go scan the card and they'll be able to have 4 buttons. They'll be able to pick 1 litre, I think it's 2 litre, 5 litre, 10 litre. And then it lapses. The card then renews the next 24 hours. So 1 card, 10 litres. And then when we worked out the carbon footprint and the complexity of how many trucks it would take, it was actually cheaper to put a pipeline in. So we're putting a 5-kilometre pipeline from the sugar mill and distillery, known as Manas, to the village into 2 ATMs initially with the RFID readers, and there are 10 points per ATM. So there'll be 10 people at a time can get their daily ration of water. In the Western world, you look at Australia as a country, the first 12 years of Australia before the First World War, we were in drought. Yet we still flush our toilets and water our gardens with some of the highest quality water in the world. I mean, Melbourne water is like fabulous. You drink it straight out of the tap. And it's crazy because we're building desalination plants here. When if we change our habits and start to use grey water to water gardens and reuse and capture water from our roofs, we can solve our water problem just by changing the way our habits. So we need to make sure that we have highest purpose, highest use with our water because of the quality.
So that means that in Nagpur, you build this 5-kilometer pipeline, which goes to the ATMs. And at the ATMs, they get distributed water directly there with the RFID chip card. And that water is the water standard, which you would be bottling if it was a bottling factory.
Correct.
When do you decide to go for bottles and when do you decide to go for ATMs?
ATMs deliveries, bottles don't make sense. Bottles, we have another project in California with Ingomar, they're the second largest tomato processor. And what we're doing with some of that water is we're going to donate that into disaster relief, Convoy of Hope. You would have seen the cyclones there in Florida and they'll be bottling it in, the larger, I think is it 5 litre or 10 litre, not retail bottles.
Probably gallons something because it's the US and they can't use normal units.
And when I look into the future, I'll make a bit of a prediction. In my lifetime, when I was a kid, if you'd said we're all going to be buying and drinking bottled water, particularly in Melbourne, Australia, the water is just fabulous. I would have thought this is just crazy, right? And bottled water, particularly shipping it thousands of miles, glacial water. I won't mention the brand, I'll mention the country, Fiji and San Pellegrino and all of these brands were pretty cool maybe in the 80s and 90s and that, but they don't cut it anymore. It's to ship water thousands of kilometers with a huge footprint to drink is just crazy stuff. Water should not travel more than 200 miles or 200 kilometers.
I'm fully with you, but you started by saying California. So I have to now be the devil's advocate. I mean, California, 80% of the people never drink tap water. They always drink from the bottle, even if you can argue that whatever the source of water they have, it is arguably always potable. So you're in bottled water land inside the US, which has the specificity to be the second country in the world after Mexico, so their direct neighbor, to invest more water overall in bottled water than they do in utility water.
That's crazy.
And it's funny to hear someone with a bottled water brand tell me that is also nonsense.
It's old technology, Antoine. I mean, in time, it'll be refill water. You'll be refilling your own vessel of some sort. Of course, there may be times where you have to purchase water for whatever reason, but it won't be the main focus. I think what I was going to say is that in one lifetime, we would have seen the birth of bottled water and the death of bottled water all in one lifetime.
Interesting prediction. I'm putting that in the fridge. I hope I can take it out and credit you as a visionary the day it happens, because I would be embracing that vision. But what I'm curious to understand, I'm sorry, because of my stupid comment, I lost my train of thought.
That's all right. You can edit that. You can edit that bit out.
I always edit myself to look clever. I'm not so clever. Where was I heading? Okay, I lost the train of thought. If it comes back, I'll tell you. I'll give you another train of thought. What I was thinking of is when I first look into We Grow Water, you mentioned the film in the beginning, so I'm going to put that out so it's done. I mean, it's the moral of The Big Short,
which is slide that comes up at the end of the movie.
And that's where I was curious to see if you had looked into that, because He's investing into fruit and vegetable because that's a way to move water. Now, one step beyond is 19% of the food in the world gets wasted. And that means the water which is inside and trapped inside that food is wasted as well. Would that be something where you could technologically address it, or does it make any sense to address it?
Yeah, look, it has been brought up before. We have sort of considered it. It's probably not a priority, that distraction thing that we talked about earlier, that there's only, as I jokingly say, there's only so many yachts you can water ski behind. We need to attach what we do to existing businesses. That's where I think it becomes commercially viable. We're not building infrastructure. We're not building new factories. What we're essentially doing is abutting a 40-foot shipping container to existing infrastructure. It's low energy, really low distributed infrastructure play where we can put these into, the maintenance crew's already there, the power's already there, there's compressed air already there, there's a concrete base probably already there, a compound for a truck to drive in is already there. We may have to put some holding tanks up to hold our water so that the logistics can be organized. All of that exists. So it means that our invention gets a really good head start. It means that we can commercialize without too much friction, without too much overcapitalizing. The Manus side is a bit different that we're doing in India because we're harvesting from a distillery and a sugar mill. So we've had to create our own compound. And you would know the guys from IWS, the blue box that they do where they build municipal water and wastewater treatment. We've essentially replicated that, a compounded area where we're having to put in some infrastructure. But generally, our Ingomar side is fabulous if you get online and have a look at it. It was easy to install. And, we've got maintenance crews there. We've got all the servicing in the off season, all taken care of. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We're just trying to repurpose all of the little bits. And hopefully that sort of gives you an idea of how it all plugs together.
Coming back to my red thread of the Microsoft case, yep. So they are buying 60 million liters. Your 40-foot container can output 100 to 130 million liters. So if I do quick maths, you have 40 to 70 million liters of free capacity where you could be triggering that if someone is buying some water credits online. So do you put that online for anybody in that water basin to buy it, or how do you connect?
Correct. The logical prospect would be the next data center next to Microsoft. So, in the area, for example, Fujitsu, but these are facts that you can data scrape yourself as a data center in the same region. This whole region is full of data centers and more being built. So we're open for business. I mean, this is a testimonial. Microsoft themselves could buy more. This just covers one of their data centers, and there are more and more being built. And as you're seeing, Antoine, there's for the first time in the last 18 months, 2 years, that water use has gone up in these data centers because of AI, supercomputers. So it's not helping achieve the 2030 and other sustainability goals. And the last thing there too, we're targeting actually more than data centers. We're looking at industries of oil and gas, textile, food and beverage, and chemical companies. And they've all been diagnosed as heavy water users. And most of them are focusing on the inside the fence, fixing what they can control within their operations, within their factories, etc. But it becomes important where they can't do any more within their own factory limits. And they then need to look outside of that. And we're offering a technology-based solution, not a nature-based solution, and applying it to highest purpose use wash programs. So it's not a volumetric replenishment play, it's an impact play.
I have a hater question because I need to be sometimes also the bad guy. And then I'd like to get your vision. But the hater question is, okay, you have a tech which does something a bit special in the way that you're tapping into a new source of water. Super nice, super fine. Now, about 5% of the water in the world is reused. So there is also that big bucket of water, which is maybe more accessible than, water from carrots. That's not the first place I would think of. Wouldn't that make sense from a cost perspective to rather tap in an easier source of water than the one you're tapping? Or are you so cost competitive with that exotic source of water, then it's just supplemental. It's not one or the other.
I think we've gone down this pathway to probably end where you're talking about as well. I mean, the platform is built in the mindset, we talked about it earlier, where we're not going to restrict that platform to just botanical water. I think there are 6 water verticals and, AWG, botanical water, these new sources of water or reuse of water is one vertical. But, we have desalination, we have zero liquid discharge, we have biodiversity, we have all of these other technologies. So ultimately, we I believe the platform can house all of those. So similar to the investment example I gave earlier, somebody can come along and mix and match and create a portfolio of solution to their water problems. And that's the ultimate goal of Botanical Water Exchange, or, whatever the exchange is called. I suspect it'll probably change in its name, but that's how we've future-proofed it. We've sort of reverse engineered it. And when we briefed Fujitsu and Fred's team, I sat with him for a long time. I normally pour a scotch on a Sunday evening in Melbourne, and he's Sunday morning drinking coffee. And we just talk crazy stuff, a bit like what we're talking about here. So we're not closed. If we can find more water and it makes sense, we'll do it.
So you nailed the answer to my HR question. Kudos for that. In terms of where you stand right now, what's available? You have those moving parts of BWX, of Swim, of WIC. Where are they in their journey? Is it alpha? Is it beta? Is it already public? Where are you on all those maps?
A very simple question. We are open for business. All of those aren't in theory. They have been built. They are commercial standard. Water harvesting, the final thing we're doing, again, I don't think it's commercially sensitive, but the next speed hump. So all of that's been built. The question I often get asked by my own board and my own investors and other people is, what's the next speed hump, as I call it? What's the next friction point? And the next friction point is, how do we go fast? We're past scale, a startup. We're now moving into scale up land as you follow your journey from commercial and then corporatization of this business. And it's really the water harvest units, building them and managing them and deploying them. It takes a lot of capital. The units that are operating now sit on my balance sheet, and I can't keep investing millions of dollars on my balance sheet to keep building these water harvest units. So we're in negotiation and discussion with varying parties about carving out a fund, $100 million fund, let's call it, where we can own and build and service those water harvest units as a distributed infrastructure fund, an SPV, whatever you want to call it, where it allows me to literally channel the impact sponsor onto the platform, help them solve their problem, connect them to the processor, and then refer them to this fund to then install and manage the water harvest unit. That's the next really big thing that has been keeping me up at night for the last few months. So I think it'll be done because we've worked out that the fund can return about a 15 to 18% return, which is an excellent return, underwritten by some of the world's largest companies. The Microsofts of the world are underwriting long-term contracts. So it gives confidence to an investor group to put capital to build these units.
Let me put that in my words to make sure I understand it. That means today, when you look at your map, the bottleneck is building the 40-foot containers and the like, because that is highly capital intensive. And the solution to that is raising a fund with a 15 to 18% target return rate, which would be financing those units and then rolling them out.
Correct.
To get that one right, my counter question, and don't think that I'm bugging you with the exact same question in different form and fashion, but I'm going to try it once again. I was in New Orleans last week for WEFTech and walking the floor of WEFTech, 1,000 booths roughly at WEFTech. Out of these 1,000 booths, let's say 40% are in wastewater. Let's say half of those have claims of industrial wastewater. And again, half of them may have claim of industrial wastewater reuse up to zero liquid discharge. If the craziest part and the biggest hurdle to connect all those corporates with their water pledges to actual reuse is the platform, the blockchain, the absolute certainty that you're leading to an impact, then why do you bother developing the extractors? I get that's where you're coming from. I get that's the root of the idea, but that sounds to me like a Bourbon story. Bourbon was doing all kinds of stuff. And one of the stuff they were doing is that they were sharing pictures and people hated everything, but they loved the picture and ergo, here's Instagram. Are we in these kind of cases, or I'm really extrapolating and it doesn't make sense to just sit on the perspective of building something with a 15 to 18% return rate? So it's too good to be ignored as an opportunity.
Are you saying why are we continuing to do that because of the road?
Yeah, I'm really throwing you around with a lot of...
Look, it is tempting, but as I said, you've got to stay focused. In businesses that I've run them with, I have built every piece of the value chain. For example, the dairy industry, we started with milk, our own farms, logistically to a factory, to manufacture a product, to then ship it to over 40 countries in the world. And we had a stake in every part of that value chain, a highly complex, complicated business. So when I sold that business, I vowed that I would never do that again because I wanted to maintain what little hair I had left at the end of that process. So this time around, I think you have to suffer almost some of doing that initially because no one believes until there's a saying we use in our office. Everyone wants to be first at coming second. So no one wants to go first. So we have to suffer putting this on our balance sheet and building these units and doing that. But I think if you leave a little bit of money on the table for another investor group, and you can then focus on doing more, building out the platform, bringing on other technologies, bringing that ecosystem together. That's another lot of work, Antoine. That just doesn't happen by accident. Let the fun guys, the infrastructure guys who understand infrastructure, run it, have commercial contracts, make sure they're serviced, they'll get paid, all of the rest. Let us get on with impacting people. Ultimately, as you get older, your lens changes. And I do have anyone that works in our business has a strong philanthropic component. It's part of it. It's part of our culture that we build. And I think you just don't want to be another grumpy old guy that's made a lot more money, because there's lots of grumpy old guys with money out there and lots more with a lot more money than me. But imagine going to Jamaica one day, having impact some of the world's most vulnerable people and never having met these people. And I don't care. They don't even need to know who we are. Let's just do it for the sake of doing it. And if there's any good karma out there, it'll return. You give without expecting to receive. You always get more in your life.
You mentioned the fundraising. So is that the step you're at? Like you're on your 100 million target? Where are you roughly?
Yeah, we're deep into negotiation with 2 or 3 parties at the moment.
Private equity type of players?
Well, we have private equity on our shareholder register. We started with the family and friends, as everyone does, and our own money, of course, along our own family office money. But we're now looking at strategies from a fund to there is a bank involved as well, that they're looking at it from a sort of a leasing, a bit like leasing a car lease, and they're quite interested. But look, it'll find its level. Funnily enough, that's actually the easy bit. We've been doing infrastructure plays in Australia. Macquarie Bank and others have been doing this. We were leaders in the world with this sort of stuff. I'm a little bit fussy. I don't think it's just about money. I'd love to have a nice cultural fit with whoever it is. They may bring more to the negotiation than just the cash. And I'm hoping to lock all of that up before the end of this year.
In your documentation, you were kind enough to send me to prepare for that conversation. You have a nice mapping and list of the biggest corporate water users. Global Water Intelligence partnered with XPV earlier this year to create an opportunity map of what they call the $12 trillion opportunity. And they were predicting that those corporates were going to pour a lot of money to capture not only for their water stewardship, but also simply their water security, which means you could be tapping straight into their pockets, not only to buy the credits, but also to finance the outcome. Am I just running through an open door, or is it something you're considering?
Well, I haven't really thought of it. Now that you mentioned it, it's something that we should do a little bit more work on. You should be joining our team, Antoine. I know you've got a good resume with this sort of stuff, but look, it's still a work in progress. I guess that's the bit that we're up to. We're up to that chapter in the book. We're going with an open mind. We also have another rule, and I broke that rule a couple of weeks ago in our office, where there's no such thing as a silly question. And, sometimes when you're time poor, you sort of dismiss stuff. And I think we tried our family office to just encourage thought processes. You got me thinking now with what you just said. I might have a chat to you after we finish up. You might have a better view of it, a better lens than myself.
Well, always happy to chat. Closing question for that deep dive. I don't want to ask you a 2030 or 2050 vision, because it sounds to me like you have that one very clearly outlined and you've articulated it very well. I'm going to ask you about more direct KPIs for the next 6 months or the next 12 months. What is it that needs to happen for you to keep on track with your aspiration for the long run?
One thing I've learned in startup land and scale-up land is the business plans and the financials. You need to do that. Investor groups and reporting and lenders and all of those people. But we like to keep it really simple. I found a formula where I think we're building it. We go back to the common denominator of water harvest units. And our 2025 goal, end of 25, and we're probably going to fall short at the current run rate, is to have a pipeline, a commitment of 200 water harvest units. So if at the end of 2025, we can have a committed pipeline. Now, they won't be built and installed. I don't think you can do that based on the resources that we have. And by the end of this year, which we're going to probably get close to doing. We had a pipeline, and it's going to sound an odd number, of 14 water harvest units operating. So another 11. We've got 3 going at the moment, and I think we'll achieve that. It wouldn't take much to get 1 order of 10 at a time, and that's how we're going to do it. We're going to keep it really simple. Now, the spreadsheet, off that, it's a whole bunch of stuff, right? It cascades down, but we like to keep it really simple and just focus there. So you met Chris before this. He's head of our commercial. He's only just joined us a few months ago, but I've known Chris. He worked in our Findex business for a decade. He's a good growth guy. I poached him controversially. I'm smiling if you knew the backstory there, but he's a great guy. And I figure if we keep things simple, there's a complexity to keeping things simple, and the discipline that goes with that. That would be the answer. 14 by the end of this year, 200 by the end of next year.
I should have asked before, but now you got me curious. You're building all of those out of Melbourne?
The American ones will be built in the US, made in America. I know a guy that's coming up for a real election that loves the made in America type story. And the Indian ones are now going to be built locally in India because of the taxes. To import equipment is horrendous. We did ship one of our 2 units out of Australia to India.
But so they're not built by, you're not opening a factory out there. It's designed to print.
Third-party, collaborative, commercial contracts. So it's our IP, all of the process engineering, all the drawings, all ours, as best as you can, protect that. A question I get asked a lot is, why won't it get copied? And I guess, we've all been in markets in Bali and bought Nike t-shirts. So we're not silly enough to say that we're going to conquer the world, because those big corporations can't stop people copying it. However, remember, this is a demand-driven business. The secret sauce here is the relationships with the Fortune 100 companies, the CEO Water Mandate, all of those guys. And they get up every morning, they've got a problem to solve. And I believe we are a great solution. You can copy a machine, but underwriting that machine and then delivering maximum impact with real people, highest purpose use, isn't easy to replicate, Antoine. I mean, I've been at this for the last 4 years, literally almost full time. 80% of my time gets spent there. I have to spend a little bit of time in some of our other businesses. I chair some other companies and things. But, good luck to somebody that's going to get out of bed and then try to do that again.
Well, I guess I'd be curious to see how that evolves, how you get to your 14 by the end of the year, how you get to the 200 next year. So whenever you want to update us on that track, happy to host you again and to see how that evolves. To round off those interviews, I have a list of rapid fire questions. I know I've been very French and I'm abusing your time now, but if that's fine with you, I promise you I won't digress.
Okay, fire away.
It's time for the rapid fire questions.
What is the toughest challenge in your opinion for a water tech startup?
Well, it's the same as any other tech startup, the same vagaries of, the guys in the garage. The invention, I always say, is not enough. A good invention is not enough. It's better than a bad invention, but you need all of the other pieces to the puzzle, to go through this commercialization, corporatization.
What would be your best single piece of advice for the founders and managers of the about 1,000 early stage water startups?
Find a good mentor, get a different lens. Don't be arrogant about your invention. Look for collaborative opportunities. Sometimes we run an incubator accelerator here in Melbourne called SproutX as part of our Findex business. And I've seen 2 different inventors, 2 different startups come to do a 6-week course and then develop a whole new business out of that, where neither one was going to succeed, but by collaborating, they've actually created an even better idea.
What's the drop of knowledge you wish more investors knew about the water sector?
Investors capital will find its way to a good invention. Good inventions eventually will find capital. Water, because it's life-giving, so you've got the ultimate use, but it's heavily subsidized. So you're not really valuing water because it is sensitive. You can't imagine now if we had to pay the real value of water when we turn on our faucet. No one will be able to do that. So because governments are subsidizing, investors are a bit risk averse getting involved in those sorts of complexities, I guess is the way to put it.
Profitability or growth?
Profitability.
What's the next profile you'll hire?
IT, tech, CTO.
You're looking actually for a CTO right now. So if you want to make a short description of that role, if someone recognizes it's himself.
Now, to tell you, I was thinking you're going to post it for me and do the interviewing. Look, it won't be anything unusual. It'll be more cultural. I need somebody that understands what we're doing, fits well. a lot of time on cultural fit as an organization. There are two parts to a business. They will probably tick all of the, and I know you want short answers, there's no short answer on this. They'll tick all of what I call the mechanics, but I want them to fit all of the cultural dynamics. Any given team, it's about the dynamics of the team as much as it is about the technical qualifications.
If you have an open posting, I can put it in the show notes.
I got a feeling with your audience, Antoine, I'm going to be pummeled on LinkedIn. There'll be people wanting to have a chat.
You're protected. We are 1 hour and 15 minutes in. I mean, people will have to endure my broken English until here. So we're good. We're good. What's that tool nobody speaks about, but you couldn't live without?
Give me a clue.
I had everything on that question, from a pen to running shoes.
Couldn't live without my family, my kids.
That's a good one. I couldn't either. Sometimes
you've got three, haven't you? You've got three. Yeah, I saw that. That's good.
What are you desperately needing and want to raise an open call for right now?
Well, I don't think we desperately need anything at the moment. We're happy. I'd like to go fast though, so we probably need a little bit of everything, a little bit of luck. How's that?
What can and should I do for you? Granted, I can't provide you luck.
Oh, you can just tell our story. Is the best thing that you could do for me.
Thanks a lot for everything you shared today. Thanks for the openness. Thanks for enduring my questions. If people want to follow up with you, where should I redirect them?
The best to my LinkedIn. If they can ping me on LinkedIn, I think I'm very active on there and I can answer any questions or anything they need there.
As always, check the show notes. The link is just there and you can get connected to Terry in just one click. Thanks a lot for spending the time with me. And I hope to get an update when you are your 200 units in your order books, and then even more interesting when you're rolling them out.
Antoine, it's been a pleasure, and thank you very much for your generosity as well to invite me.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Don't Waste Water. This podcast was brought to you by GF Piping Systems. Loved this episode? Head over to Apple Podcasts to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. See you next time.